Hello everyone. Today I'll be watching a video called "The Fall of Rhodesia: The Warning to the West" um, by a YouTuber who I actually personally don't know. Sorry. The name of the channel is John Anderson Media. Well, okay, let's start.
Rhodesia won every battle. Its soldiers were disciplined, its intelligence operations were feared, its economy managed to survive under years of sanctions, its farms fed the region, cities worked and institutions functioned. Yet Rhodesia lost the war. Not because it was defeated on the battlefield, but because it lost the diplomatic war and the moral war, and ultimately the support of the very civilization it believed it was defending. The fall of Rhodesia was not simply the inevitable end of an old colonial regime. It was the result of a profound contradiction at the heart of the post-war West. Liberal elites demanded instant majoritarian democracy in a society where the institutions, cultural habits, and civic foundations required to sustain democracy were still fragile. In doing so, they helped destroy one of the most functional states in Africa and delivered its people into the hands of a Marxist-Leninist kleptocracy.
The rest of the world will one day, be persuaded to believe we were right when we resorted to armed struggle.
Now let me be clear from the start. The lesson of Rhodesia is not that minority white rule was permanently defensible. It wasn't. But the lesson here is that civilization is fragile and institutions matter. Political idealism detached from reality is destructive. Rhodesia's history is unlike almost anywhere else. It began in 1889 when Cecil Rhodes secured a royal charter from Queen Victoria to form the British South Africa Company. The mission was to explore and exploit the land north of the Limpopo River. Rhodes had a grand vision of the British Empire stretching from Cape to Cairo, and Rhodesia was part of building that civilizational dream. With the approval of a local chief to assess the mineral wealth of the lands, Rhodes sent Major Frank Johnson and 250 young British pioneers into the unknown. They travelled in a column of wagons protected by the British South Africa Police. Their task was simple but enormous: raise the Union Jack in the African interior. First at Fort Tule, then Fort Victoria, and then Fort Salisbury. To the Rhodesian pioneers, this was not just an economic venture. It wasn't just about mining or farming or settlement. It was the expansion of British civilization. They saw themselves as bringing law, order, Christianity, commerce, and discipline into the frontier region.
Yeah, interesting. And that's what modern leftists call colonization, because of the moral relativism. They would say that law and order was imposed on these poor people and it somehow oppressed them.
Ian Smith, in his book The Great Betrayal, describes the mentality of these pioneers. He writes that in the centre of southern Africa, men of British stock were once more carrying the torch on one of the few frontiers yet to be civilized. And this was no place for faint-hearted men. They had to believe they were serving something greater than themselves. And if they were not, in his words, God sent, then they were at least sent there by Queen and country to spread British civilization. That formed the spirit of Rhodesia. Rhodesians became known around the world as being more British than the British. The fact that Britain would end up turning their back on Rhodesia hurt even more, because Rhodesians' loyalty to Britain wasn't just theoretical. Many put their lives on the line to defend the empire. In the First World War, Rhodesia sent a higher proportion of its white population to serve than any other colony. Thousands of white Rhodesians served alongside black soldiers in the Rhodesia Native Regiment. In the Second World War, Rhodesia again mobilized at one of the highest rates in the empire. So many wanted to serve that the government had to introduce conscription to keep men in the country in strategically important jobs like mining. Ian Smith, who would go on to declare Rhodesia's independence from Britain and lead the country through the Bush War against the Afro-communist insurgents, also fought in the Second World War. His plane was shot down over Italy, but he survived, joined the Italian resistance, escaped back to Allied territory, and then returned to combat. This is why the betrayal to come was so painful. Rhodesians believed they had served Britain faithfully. They had built a functioning British society in Africa. They had fought Britain's wars. And then Britain turned on them. After the Second World War, the old European empires were exhausted. Britain was weak. The United States and the Soviet Union were now the great global powers. Anti-colonial nationalism was sweeping across Africa and Asia. In 1960, the British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan gave a famous speech where he said that the wind of change was sweeping Africa. African nationalism was now a political fact that Britain could no longer resist. In 1960, it was called the Year of Africa. 17 countries gained independence, dismantling hundreds of years of European rule. Many Western commentators tried to draw parallels between Rhodesia and the United States or South Africa, where racial discrimination was entrenched in law. But Rhodesia was different. Rhodesia did not have the same apartheid that South Africa had. South African apartheid was a comprehensive legal doctrine of racial separation. After the Afrikaner National Party came to power in 1948, apartheid was built through all-encompassing laws that classified and separated people by race. Rhodesia's system was different. It did not have the same formal ideology of racial separation. Anyone could have the right to vote once they met certain education, income, and property qualifications. But the result was still white minority rule. In the 1965 election, there were roughly 95,000 white Rhodesians registered to vote and only about 14,000 black Rhodesians. Yet 95% of the population was black and only 5% was white.
Yeah, of course. And for the modern leftists, these two systems are the same. For them, it's like, oh, the blacks were disproportionately represented, so it's racist. This means the system itself is racist. So they oppose merits, and for them, everything except for egalitarianism is oppression. Oppression even by physical reality. So yeah, I mean, I think Rhodesia had basically the right system. Look, I don't know the details. I never heard about Rhodesia, but what I'm hearing right now sounds very sad. Well, jumping ahead, knowing what happened. So yeah.
Rhodesia's defense was that the franchise would gradually expand as more black Africans became educated, acquired property, paid taxes, and integrated into institutions of the state.
Yeah, exactly. So no problem.
And this was Ian Smith's doctrine. Evolution, not revolution. Ian Smith did not believe that stable self-government could be created simply by holding an election. He believed democracy required foundations, and those wanting the privilege to participate carried the responsibility of upholding its institutions. It boiled down to a very British desire to uphold good standards.
Yeah, good standards. Merit-based system, correct?
But I think the fact is in these countries to the north of us that while they started off with this wonderful thing of one man, one vote, they only had it once, because thereafter it became a one-party state, which in other
Yeah, one man, one vote is just a broken system. Should never have been implemented even in the West as well.
words is virtually a dictatorship. Many of our African people have got enough sense to realize that that could happen here if we went too fast. In other words, if we changed what we believe should be an evolutionary system into a revolution.
To Smith, the post-war liberal establishment treated universal suffrage like a magic formula. Give everyone the right to vote and liberal democracy will naturally follow. But he looked across
Yeah, and they literally still hold this view today. Look at even what they tried in Iraq.
colonial Africa and saw something very different. Once colonial powers withdrew,
They certainly went into Iraq thinking that, oh, as soon as we bring democracy, the problems will go away. Yeah.
they handed over nations to people who didn't build them and whose tribal systems were anathema to liberal democracy. The result was coups, one-party states, tribal conflict, corruption, economic collapse, and political violence. To him, the lesson was obvious. If majority rule was imposed before the foundations of constitutional government were secure, before the population could understand the system they were being asked to participate in, the result would not be freedom, it would be chaos. And this was the heart of Rhodesia's conflict with Britain. Britain said there could be no independence unless there was majority rule. Smith said there could be no stable majority rule without gradual preparation of the population. He was not defending Rhodesia as a perfect society. Rhodesia certainly wasn't a liberal democracy.
And why is it liberal democracy a perfect society? One person, one vote never works. Look, I found it for the US. I used it in some of the previous videos related to Nakba, where Jews in Israel also ran into similar problems with Arabs. Like it wasn't clear what to do because they knew if they impose one person, one vote, Arab majority would just win over and then impose some insane Islamic regime on the Jews, right? So the solution which the Jews resort to is basically expel the Arabs. But the correct solution is way more simple. Just don't have one person in one system. Yeah, so this is a leftist propaganda article about the voting rights in America. But I guess they got the facts right. Challenges to voting rights in this country are hardly a 21st century invention. Entrenched groups have long tried to keep the vote out of hands of less powerful. Indeed, the United States began its great democratic experiment by granting the rights to vote to a narrow subset of society, white male land owners. Even as barriers to voting began receding in the ensuing decades, many southern states erected new ones, such as poll taxes and literacy tests, aimed at keeping the vote out of hands of African American men and other targeted groups. So yeah, you see, they present as a bad thing. As soon as poll taxes was needed to restore some amount of merit in the system. Over time, voting rights became a bipartisan priority as people worked at all levels to enact constitutional amendment and laws expanding access to the vote based on race and ethnicity, gender, disability, age, and other factors. Yeah, reduce the voting age from 18 to 21. And then enshrinement of voting protection for language minorities and people with disabilities. So to make sure that people who don't even know English were able to vote. So, okay, that's how far it went. So they try to destroy the merit-based voting system in America, and I guess they will demand the same from Rhodesia. Yeah, and I mean, I think arguably America became a worse place in a sense in terms of how the republic functions after all these changes. Of course, there are other factors in place which could be even more important, but I think that the major one, it's more like this leftist ideas was coming hand in hand with this universal voting right.
franchise was limited, the vast majority of Black Africans were excluded from voting. But that reality cannot be ignored. But Smith's argument was that the system was not meant to be permanent. It was meant to evolve. Rhodesia was moving towards broader political participation at a pace that would preserve order, prosperity, and constitutional government. The alternative was to hand power immediately over to revolutionary movements that did not have the habits or intentions of liberal democracy. And that was the choice as he saw it: gradual constitutional development or revolutionary collapse. On November 11, 1965, after failed negotiations with Britain, Smith's government issued the Unilateral Declaration of Independence. To Britain, this was an illegal rebellion against the Crown. To Smith, it was a desperate attempt to preserve British civilization from a Britain that no longer believed in itself.
Yeah, so Britain was, I guess, already overrun by these egalitarian leftists who demanded one person, one vote from the colonies. Well, I don't know, it's just literally destructive. That's how evil egalitarianism is. It's just, it represents death.
And that is the paradox of Rhodesia. It declared independence from Britain in the name of Britishness. It rebelled against the Crown while claiming to defend civilization that the Crown once represented. After Rhodesia's unilateral declaration of independence, Britain and the international community turned against it. Immediately after, the UK announced that it would have no dealings with the Smith regime. They severed diplomatic relations, stopped arms exports, and ended British aid.
Mr. Wilson's answer to the Declaration of Independence has been to outlaw the Rhodesian government and oppose it through economic sanctions.
By a series of orders signed today, Rhodesia loses the privileges that she's enjoyed as a member of the Commonwealth in the sterling area. The financial privileges have been linked with the London capital market in the sterling area.
Imports of Rhodesian sugar and tobacco have been banned.
So you see, they imposed tariffs on them, but there was some subsidies mentioned, but also explicit initiation of force. So they basically attacked.
The United Nations Security Council passed a resolution calling on states not to recognize Rhodesia or give it assistance. Ian Smith's government was condemned as an illegal racist minority regime.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like they're racist because of merit-based system.
Rhodesia became isolated diplomatically and economically. Then in 1966, two African movements, ZANU and ZAPU, launched an armed insurgency against the Rhodesian government. This became the Rhodesian Bush War. ZANU was supported by China, while ZAPU was supported by the Soviets.
Yeah, great, just great. Now communist insurgency starts, yeah.
North Korea ran a training camp where they taught insurgents how to use arms and explosives. The Bush War turned into a part of the Cold War. Rhodesia was fighting Marxist-backed guerrilla movements, but instead of seeing Rhodesia as an anti-communist ally, much of the West saw it as an embarrassment. Liberal elites sided against Rhodesia, even though the movements opposing it were authoritarian, revolutionary, and Marxist.
No, nothing new. So-called liberals support Marxists. Oh, of course, what else do you expect?
Despite sanctions and isolation, Rhodesia managed to build a highly effective military. Its army was small but professional. By the late 1970s, it included both white and black soldiers, and its special forces developed a reputation as some of the best counterinsurgency units in the world. This is why people say Rhodesia won the battles, but they lost the war. Militarily, Rhodesia could hold the line, but politically, it was being strangled. And by the West. By 1978 and 1979, the Smith government attempted to reach a settlement. Minority rule ended and the country was renamed Zimbabwe Rhodesia. Multiracial elections were held and the country's first black head of government was elected. But Britain and the international community still refused to accept the arrangement. They insisted that the nationalist guerrilla leaders Robert Mugabe and Joshua Nkomo had to be included. Under pressure from Britain and the United States and South Africa, the Rhodesian government eventually agreed to the Lancaster House settlement in 1979.
So it clearly shows that for egalitarianists, it's never enough. It's like if you think, oh, okay, I will concede. Let's give them something. No, I mean, it's like the Harry Millet said, you shouldn't give them an inch because they will use this inch to destroy you. It's never enough. Again, the stopping point for egalitarianism is just death. And this is really an example how it will play out here. It's literally what happens, death.
Britain took control of the country and new elections were held in 1980. Robert Mugabe won. Rhodesia died and Zimbabwe was born. To Britain, this was decolonisation. But to Rhodesians, it was betrayal. Because Britain had not simply abandoned Rhodesia, Britain had abandoned Britain in Africa. When the post-war moral fashion of decolonisation swept through London, Rhodesia discovered that their mother country no longer saw them as family, saw them as a problem, a remnant of an empire that Britain was now ashamed of. Rhodesia had carried British civilization into the frontier, but when Britain lost confidence in that civilization, it condemned Rhodesia for preserving the very inheritance Britain had given it. Now, whether you agree with...
Yeah, it's interesting phenomena that the empires they wrought from within. They developed this altruistic core of dysfunctional philosophies detached from reality, detached from real problems, and people on the frontiers, like they can't accept them, right? They have to reject them because you can't live with them. It's clearly dysfunctional. They understand, like, oh, if we do this, well, it's over. Like, this country is done. We will all die here. Where is it all coming from? And it's delusional leftists sitting somewhere in London and be like, oh, well, what is race? And so on, you know, what is a woman?
Ian Smith or not, it's hard to argue that Zimbabweans of any colour were better off under Mugabe. At independence, Zimbabwe had enormous advantages. It had strong agricultural production, functioning infrastructure, competent government, and goodwill from Britain and the entire world. It had every chance to succeed. Instead, as Ian Smith predicted, Mugabe consolidated power and built a corrupt, tribal, one-party state. In the 1980s came the Gukurahundi, the systematic massacre of Nabili civilians by a unit of the Zimbabwean army trained by North Korea. 20,000 people were massacred. It was a genocide. The violence was rooted in the rivalry between Mugabe's ZANU and Joshua Nkomo's ZAPU, whose support base was
So now they're fighting with each other. Okay, great.
largely ethnic Nabili. 20,000 people were killed, civilians were targeted, villages were terrorized, and re-education camps were established. This was not the liberal democracy that Rhodesians were promised. It was revolutionary consolidation. Then came the destruction of property rights. The Mugabe regime had initially proposed to purchase land from white farmers and redistribute it to black farmers. Western governments enabled this folly. 48 countries and international organizations endorsed the land program, saying it was essential for poverty reduction, political stability, and economic growth.
Yeah, of course. Support the leftist nonsense.
In the early 2000s, Mugabe's government began to fast-track the land reform through violent seizures of white-owned farms. Commercial agriculture was shattered. Productive farms were taken over, often by Mugabe's henchmen rather than ordinary Zimbabweans, and the results were devastating. Agricultural production collapsed. Exports of tobacco, one of the country's biggest exports, collapsed. Zimbabwe entered one of the worst episodes of hyperinflation in history. In 2008, inflation peaked at an unimaginable 89.7 sextillion%.
Well, yeah, I mean, Zimbabwe is kind of used as a go-to example of what hyperinflation is. Yeah, it's almost synonymous now.
GDP per capita, a proxy measure for living standards, more than halved. Around 50% of the population now lives on less than $3 a day. The white population fled and it fell by around 90%. Black Zimbabweans suffered too. Millions were driven into poverty. Many left for South Africa, Britain, Australia, and elsewhere. Life expectancy plummeted by 15 years between 1980 and 2000. It's become one of the most corrupt countries in the world, losing $1 billion a year to corruption. And Mugabe's wife earned herself the nickname of Gucci grace and the first shopper of Zimbabwe. While the people suffered, the ruling black elite became billionaires. This is why, in light of subsequent events, it's hard not to have sympathy for Smith's warnings and the plight of Rhodesians. Whatever you think of colonialism or minority rule, Zimbabwe under Mugabe has been a disaster for everyone except a tiny ruling elite and their cronies. At independence, Rhodesia had industry, infrastructure, functioning government, and productive agriculture. One generation later, Zimbabwe is now synonymous with land seizures, corruption, intimidation, hyperinflation, and collapse. The West was told that Rhodesia had to fall so that justice could rise. But what rose in its place was not democracy. It was a racist, anti-white, corrupt, and oppressive Marxist regime. Rhodesia is gone. The old Salisbury is gone. The Union Jacks have been torn down. The farms, the institutions, the confidence, the British civilization, all of it now belongs to history. But the questions raised by Rhodesia have not disappeared. How can democracy survive without the foundations that make democracy possible? Can a civilization endure if it no longer believes in itself? Is the pursuit of liberalism an unqualified good? Ian Smith's Rhodesia may have represented an untenable past, but Zimbabwe today has an equally untenable future. Rhodesia, decolonization, and the collapse of a once functioning and prosperous society is what happens when the West embraces liberal idealism regardless of reality. And it's a warning for all of us.
Well, I don't see it as liberal idealism. I mean, merit-based system is included in standard classical liberalism. What they try to impose is egalitarianism, which again, it only has death as fixed point. So that's what they got. So yeah, it's a sad story, and I think one person, one vote is just a system which shouldn't be implemented anywhere. As I said before, if I think about from the capitalist perspective, it seems natural that you only vote on the things you own. So if the government works as a gigantic company, you vote proportionally to the shares in it which you purchased. So that's how voting should work. Yeah, this is a kind of sad story. And I agree, it's kind of warning to the West. It's more like a speed run of where the West is heading. Just more gradually. So yeah, and I know there's a lot of people who are trying to blame, the West for all the problems in Africa, and a lot of, I see in videos saying, oh, look, Africa has example where socialism works, and so on. And I will talk about this example in separate video, but here's an example where we see clearly what happened and what exactly didn't work here. So yeah, I guess that's all for today. I think it was a great video. Thank you everyone. Goodbye.